I think because of the way that taonga died out, became dormant, that we're sort of coming to the irrefutable fact that taonga Kōrero, that Māori music is the classical music of this land. You know? Like Indian music is classical music in India.
Yeah, I think that as someone that is an academic and has taught academically, has children who have to write essays, and I think I find myself, you know, I often repeat to myself, you know, define the question. Be sure to define, because within the question lies the answer. So we use the words of the question to define to create the answer. Otherwise the answer is unrelated to the question. So the language of the question must be inherent to the language of the answer for the two to be related. Otherwise, you know, they're disparate. And so when I hear the word classical, which I use, I often think, is it? Or is it orchestral? And so I think, you know, you using the word classical in this context, around the idea of is taonga Kōrero, maybe, you know, the way that it's become dormant and now been revived, is it the classical music of Aotearoa, in the way that maybe, you know, Indian music is classical. I wonder about the word classical, and what that is, because strictly speaking, is classical actually an epoch? Isn't it a period? And this is something that I am in a struggle with currently as an anthropologist and a taonga Kōrero musician around the word traditional. You know, like Sean Mellon wrote a great article on Albert Wendt and the misuse of the word traditional, or the fact that traditional doesn't actually even exist. And going to Womex just recently in Poland, the World Music Expo and Trade Fair. So this is world music. And you know, there was some academic sessions involved, and one of them was about the transmission of tradition, and the discussion was basically, you know, like it was the indigenous people who were involved in the discussion that basically went, whoa, actually, you know, I don't think that there is such a thing as traditional, because definitively culture is fluid and is always changing. So tradition, the word traditional, actually encapsulates and freezes in terms of time. It freezes a particular period that then, if it's left frozen in our minds, remains fixed and unchanged, while actually it's streaming forward into the future and is changing. Is the demand is that it must be relevant so that it remains in the hearts and minds of the young, and so there are a number of what you might call traditional practices based around ritual and ceremony, spirituality, that are I now perceive as more about telling stories. And these stories are like lessons and metaphors to how to live your life today and tomorrow. Not about how we lived our lives yesterday. But there is, I think it is important to recognise that the music of taonga Kōrero, no matter how much we strictly actually don't know what it sounded like. And I mean, strictly speaking, anthropologically, in regards to traditional song and dance, I mean, kapa haka was basically kind of a reinvention or a re-innovation by Apurana Ngāta in the 50s to do with revitalisation. And so, there is this perception around kapa haka being traditional. I mean, strictly it's not. And there is a great deal to do with Tongaporo and the modern revival and revitalisation of this particular element of culture, Māori culture, that is needs to be acknowledged as unknown. And this is why we've got this form occurring. This is why it's actually so exciting. Well, it is for me, is that we are basically kind of on a new frontier where we are creating new tradition. And so, as an anthropologist, this is the cutting edge. This is a cultural element that is brand new, based on respect, which is what tradition should be about. It should be about honour and respect, rather than, and about function, rather than necessarily about form, I think. And I can feel myself kind of digging a hole here, because I am in a conversation with you, and so I am improvising, and I do know that what I say is challenging, but that's what I'm trying to do, by honouring your question, and so leaping headfirst into a discussion is by saying, yes, I'm willing to have this discussion. I'm willing to posit potential ideas around what it is, what it was, what we're doing, what it can be. And all of those things must be fluid for us to develop a strong discourse. We must give and take, in the same way that our clothes shake around our body when we grab each other and say yes, no, and as academic, if it's an academic discussion, then we must be very careful to not take things personally. We must be very careful to consider the discourse for what it is, and to reach outside our comfort zone, to maybe even speak things that we don't necessarily even wholeheartedly believe, but for the sake of discussion and for the sake of the development for all of us, really kind of look to do that for our children's sake and their sake and for our sake and for our tupuna's sake, for our ancestors who. And I believe that, this revival is the way it is because our ancestors have deemed it so. They are the ones that have brought it to light. They are the ones that have uncovered it. And so it would be dishonourable for me to not look in the nooks and crannies and explore what it is that they are bringing, what they are trying to do. So it's a phenomenal situation we're in. I'm really not entirely sure of how many cultural phenomenons exist like this on the planet currently. We're very fortunate. It's very beautiful. It's very exciting, and there's jeopardy also, So yeah, classical. There's absolute no doubt that the instruments are the instruments of ancient New Zealand. They're made. The stones, the tumu tumu kohatu that I play, are not as old as they are New Zealand. They are as old as where they come from. As the trees are, that as the bones of the birds and so on, and the sounds that they make, there's no doubt that they usher things for people that seem to be unequivocal but also unexplainable. In terms of musical forms, we're not there yet, because there is that element that is still not uncovered. And so by the playing and the limitations of the instruments and the way that the instruments do this but don't do that is part of that exploration, is part of that renaissance. And it should be recognised, we talk about classical, well, let's talk about the word renaissance. I mean, isn't there an inherent part of that definition of that word that is actually about enlightenment? I do believe there is, that renaissance basically means enlightened or enlightenment. So why do we use that word, if there isn't enlightenment occurring? The bringing of knowledge, new light to a dark place. And so, I like to think of the word revitalization. There's a lot of there's a lot of the use of the prefix it's reconstruction, and I often, and then there's the word innovation, which there's no doubt that there's innovation occurring within the revitalization of these instruments, especially musically, in terms of collaborations with modern forms of music and cross-cultural forms, and the use of, say, like for instance, the use of a loop pedal to explore traditional ways of ensembling is an innovation. And there's no doubt, thanks to that there's no doubt that we as Māori came into the electronic age at the same time that everyone else did, and so that these are tools that are available to us as Māori, as modern Māori who seek to honour tradition. Basically, there's nothing that we do that is traditional, except use the form of the instruments that is traditional, because they come from a particular time and period that is in the past. But I find constantly that when I teach about the instruments and I have the instruments laid out, and I talk about traditionalism and I use that word, I find myself, there's a demand upon myself as an academic, as an anthropologist, to express the fact, for a start, that having all of these instruments in one place together is not traditional. That as Māori, we played one instrument, and we ensembled with someone else who played the other instrument, and so multi-instrumentalism, to the degree that is occurring in the Renaissance currently, is not a traditional thing. Nor is it traditional to take instruments around the country and to pull them all out and to lay them out and teach about them. That wasn't the way that we learned traditionally about them. And these are, for some people, these are details, that are complicated and complicate the situation. But I find myself, that I find a self-imposed demand or an academic demand upon myself to express these to people so that they understand the situation immediately that we're in, which is that we're in a very special time where we have all of this knowledge and all of these instruments together, but this is not actually how it was, and possibly that in itself acts as an illustration, acts as an avenue for them to immediately understand how much isn't traditional. The instruments are the voices of the land. They are made from the trees and the rocks, and that tumu tumu kohatu, the striking of the stones, is not like the sound of Papatūānuku. It is the sound. This is her. This is what she sounds like when she works with herself, and that this stone from here and this stone from here, how they sound different. And it's been one of the responsibilities that was pressed forward by Richard Nuns and passed on to myself and other practitioners, which was about honouring the land through the instruments. And so I spent a number of years travelling the country, personally playing, stopping at places and playing the instruments to the geography, to the land, to the sky, to the trees, playing in the bush, playing to the birds, but playing to these things that maybe as Westerners we don't perceive to have ears. Playing to the rivers, playing to the mountains, playing on the mountains, and returning that vibration that the land hadn't actually experienced for some time, and that being an act of healing. And it's these things that are just as important as them reaching humankind. Just as important as the sound reaching humankind is also the re-establishment of balance, and the healing of the sky and the land and our ancestors, from which we come.